Production is the true story of what really happened in the Garden of Good and Evil.
Savannah is impervious to the outside world.
Murder is only half the story.
I think they knew how to read between the lines.
Midnight in Savannah, next on A&E.
A secluded American town. A strange cast of characters. A murder mystery. The recipe for a hit book and a Clint Eastwood film. And all the stories are true.
First of all, let me welcome you all to the beautiful old historic city of Savannah, Georgia. How many of y'all have read the book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil? The book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, has increased tourism by 46% in Savannah since last January. Healthier families.
The sleepy, historic city of Savannah, Georgia can hardly believe what's happening to it these days. Suddenly, it's become a tourist mecca.
You haven't read the book? What do you mean? You know they don't allow you across Georgia-South Carolina line unless you've read the book.
It amazes me that so many people all over the world and all over the United States, really are interested in Savannah. Because this is where I live, and I thought, why are they interested in this place, But there must be some intrigue.
The source of the intrigue is hard to avoid. A volume that Savannahans simply call The Book.
There is a book I want to tell you about, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, the worst gossip about the best people in town. All about what makes the world go round, money and power and sex and perversion and greed and incompetence and the killing and 4 murder trials and more sex and more perversion and some voodoo. In any case, we do have signed autographed copies for sale downstairs at $25 a clip. End of commercial.
There's no way anybody could have known that it would have been a big success, that it was going to be a bestseller. I had no thought that it would be a bestseller. I thought it would be critically well received because I worked very hard on it, and I thought that it would have a modest commercial success.
Modest? Far from it. Midnight has already sold well over 1 million hardback copies in the United States alone and been translated into 20 languages. And now it's a film shot in Savannah by director Clint Eastwood. The book has such a hold on fans that they go on special tours of Savannah's main cemetery, hoping to see the Bird Girl statue on the book's front cover. But the family who own it are so sick of tourists trampling the plot that they've moved the statue to Savannah's Telfair Museum.
And look down the track, the one leading back.
What makes Midnight special is that it's not just a good yarn. The settings, the characters, and the stories are all true, give or take a little poetic license. John Berendt, a New Yorker, came to Savannah and uncovered a treasure trove of material. He painted a rich mosaic of life in a small, secluded city, with characters drawn from all levels of the social strata, from high society to risque nightclubs. And woven through all the character portraits in this picture-perfect town is the murder mystery which sends Savannah into shock.
He did come and expose the underbelly of Savannah to the world, I must say. And what interesting stories they are.
There's the wealthy gay antiques dealer whose parties were the hottest ticket in town, but whose dark side would lead him into violent confrontation.
He really had sort of a
I guess you could say, a dark side. But the ones of us who were his friends and went to the parties and were entertained at dinner parties and things like that, we never really were exposed to the other side of his life.
There's the outspoken female impersonator.
I thank all of you heterosexuals for having the courage to come in and accept us for who we are and not label us for who you want us to be. We thank you for that. And all of the homosexuals, we say thank you for giving the heterosexuals a place to come on a Wednesday night, honey. Yes, we do, honey.
There won't be another.
There's the piano-playing lawyer, whose frequent scams and legendary charm separated more than one investor from his money.
He sweet-talked his way everywhere. It's a real talent. And he could, charm you out of everything. He's loved doing things with people and with them. At the same time, he would not shrink from writing a check that he couldn't cover.
And amid all the character portraits are the events inside this Savannah mansion. Events that still hold the city spellbound.
Who in the world would read that book? Well,
Having a Yankee author come to Savannah and expose the city's family secrets to the world has, not surprisingly, left the town divided.
Lots of controversy over the book, many of the older families not liking the book one bit. John didn't tell anybody he was writing a book. Well, of course, when the book was published, many of the older families very upset with John Barrett.
I wish it had never been written. I think it is slanderous. I think the way they portrayed people in the book is outrageous.
We're not a city of murder and voodoo and chicanery and trickery and the kind of people that are pictured, and featured in that book.
I think those who have been extremely upset, perhaps more than anything else, just don't want to admit that it's here. But I think that everything that he saw was here.
99% of Savannah approve of this book. Maybe less than 0.5% absolutely opposed to it. They're generally old-line aristocrats that do not like light shined on them at all, it seems to me.
It's no shock that there's some resentment over the book. Savannah has long valued its privacy. In fact, Savannahans have a special name for outsiders who come to stay.
The Gucci carpetbaggers. They love moving into the historic district, and as soon as they get settled, right away, they start telling us all the things we can do to change our beautiful city. Well, being the polite Southerners that we are, we just kind of smile, nod our heads, but we don't change a thing. Savannahans have never, ever liked change.
Savannah really is interested pretty much in Savannah. They're interested in what goes on in Savannah, what goes on down the street, what goes on in the next house. They focus on things very close at hand. As one woman said to me, we happen to like things just the way they are. So you can come here and be a guest, but when you're finished being a guest, bye-bye.
It's easy to see why Savannahans don't want to change their city much. It's one of the most beautiful in America.
I was astonished at the beauty of the place. I felt as though I were suddenly in this semi-tropical garden city, all off by itself on the coast of Georgia, surrounded by the ocean on one side and piney woods and marshes on the other side.
We should begin with the name Savannah. It's such a lovely, melodious Indian name, Savannah. Thank God Oglethorpe didn't choose a name like Pittsburgh for the name of the town. But the beauty here is phenomenal. The squares with the Spanish moss dripping from the oak trees is just incredible beauty. And I think this beauty impacts the residents. It's hard to live amidst this beauty and not be affected by it. It makes us different and special and characters, it seems to me.
Savannah's beauty is part nature, part planning. The Englishman who founded the city in 1733, James Oglethorpe, laid it out so that each neighborhood has its own square, an oasis of calm and greenery.
It's the most planned place in the United States. All landscape architects come here to study now because it is considered to be an idealistic, romantic, practical, and inexpensive method of using the environment to let people live a decent life.
Louis Kahn, the architect, called them our living rooms because people meet in them, they sit in them. You keep up with your neighbors that way.
The 22 squares that we have in Savannah are a metaphor for Savannah itself because the squares look in on themselves and then Savannah looks in on itself. Savannah is absolutely impervious to the outside world.
The squares were there from the start, but the gracious mansions came later, thanks to an invention on a local farm.
In 1793, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin on a plantation outside of Savannah, and that really changed Savannah's standing in the world. The invention of the cotton gin brought large amounts of money to Savannah, and accordingly, a fabulous architecture.
That money turned into all the little mansions, small, not large. We don't build big castles here. Small, mini mansions, but elegant and just the very latest of everything and lovely style and taste and decor.
And just as Savannah's business sense helped build the city, it also helped save it from annihilation. Towards the end of the Civil War, the Yankee General William T. Sherman destroyed Atlanta, then marched towards Savannah to do the same. But the practical, business-minded men of Savannah did a deal with him, offering to surrender the city if he promised not to demolish it. One merchant, Charles Green, worried about his stocks of cotton, sweetened the deal by offering Sherman his own house. It all worked. Sherman sent President Lincoln a letter saying, "I beg to present to you, as a Christmas gift, the city of Savannah." The general stayed a month, left the city unharmed, and then marched north and burned Columbia, South Carolina, to the ground instead. And so, Savannah's mansions are still there to enchant us today. One of the most impressive, and certainly the most famous thanks to the book, is Mercer House. Begun the same year as the Civil War, its first owner, Hugh Mercer, was the great-grandfather of one of Savannah's favorite sons, songwriter Johnny Mercer, who wrote Moon River, One for My Baby, That Old Black Magic, and many others. In 1969, it was bought by antiques dealer Jim Williams, who would unwittingly become the central character of the book.
Jim was charming as a flower and sometimes mean as a snake. He could make you feel like you were the most important person in the world. And then if you crossed him, he could come at you. He was a very strange mixture of good and evil.
Arrogant, charming, generous, mean. These were all words used to describe Savannah's Jim Williams, a wealthy and influential antiques dealer who's the pivotal character in the book Midnight.
Jim Williams was one of the most remarkable people I ever interviewed. I liked him a lot. He was brilliant, particularly in his line of work, antiques and history. Jim had a wicked sense of humor, really wicked. Sometimes you could call it mean-spirited. But he was charming, really charming.
I enjoy living like an aristocrat without being one, Williams once said. Blue bloods are so weak. He renovated and furnished Mercer House with exquisite taste. But it was not from old money. His father was a barber in rural Georgia, and Jim Williams was a self-made man.
I remember that as a child, we would spend Sunday afternoons in the family car driving around central Georgia, where there are a lot of fine old plantation homes, looking for things for Jim to buy. And remember that at this point he was 13, maybe 14 years old. So he grew up with this enormous interest in old things.
Williams loved to entertain in high style, and his Christmas party was the social event of the year.
They were very elegant and something that we all looked forward to, and even murmured, "Oh, you think we'll be invited this year?" If Jim got mad at you, you didn't get invited. He wasn't ostentatious. In fact, he was maybe on the shy side.
He was an arrogant man. I mean, he's like, he had no difficulty in telling you were stupid. Okay, I know more than you. I bought the damn chair. I know what that chair is worth. Okay, and you say, look, it's got a patch here. That doesn't matter. The man who patched it was an artist, you know, that kind of thing.
Although Williams entertained society, he knew that many blue bloods resented his self-made success. He, in turn, could be disdainful of them.
He thought that men and women were trapped into this social structure that made it necessary for them to work in certain places, do various things, join certain clubs and all of that. And he thought that they were really caught in a trap. And Jim relished all of that. That was part of his wicked humor.
That wicked humor spilled over once into public scandal. A film crew was shooting a Civil War movie outside Mercer House and had covered the square with soil and told residents not to use their front doors during filming. Jim, in protest, hung a Nazi flag from his balcony to disrupt shooting.
When I came up the steps, I looked around, and there was a swastika, huge swastika, flying across the square. And my initial reaction, of course, was amazement. I couldn't think what was happening, but it was chilling too. It's an enormous banner, and it occurred to me that it was flying just across the square from a synagogue.
Jim knew he was shocking people when he did it. He had a Nazi flag that his uncle had brought home from the war, the Second World War. So he did it without any political motive. They did it to shock people. He enjoyed that.
But to some who knew him, Williams' public bravado was simply a mask for some deeper insecurities.
He exuded some confidence, but I think underneath it all, he was lonely, not too sure of himself. He had to feel some kind of power in order to make himself not collapse or be taken advantage of. Jim could be seen as a mid-20th century kind of tragic hero. You know, he was gay in a world that did not at that time accept it. If you come to Savannah and you establish yourself on a fringe community, then you remain kind of a fringe person. And no matter how glamorous your parties may be and everybody wanting the invitation, it's not that important to Savannah.
There was at least one element of Jim Williams' private life that had nothing to do with society. His name was Danny Hansford, a 21-year-old street hustler who did part-time work for Williams and who spent many a night at Mercer House.
From Danny's point of view, he was a kid with no money and no education. And here he was, living part of the time anyway, in this beautiful house. And he was the friend of somebody with a lot of money who could do him some good, buy him clothes, buy him food, buy him a car, buy him whatever he wanted.
Danny Hansford lived in the shadows, and this school photo is one of the few shots of him. He grew up violent, once attacking his sister and threatening his mother.
I knew that because I had seen Jim cut one time. He had a long cut. And of course, I knew probably how he got it.
Danny often said, "I ain't got nothing to live for," and spent much of his time sitting in Bonaventure Cemetery, where he once told a friend, "If I die in Mercer House, Jim will get me one of those big headstones, the small ones, for poor people.
Jim always had an entourage around him, and Danny would be dismissed, and you could see anger. He would send him away while he went and did his more classy acts, like go to the Chatham Club for dinner, and he wouldn't take Danny. And he didn't like that at all.
I personally liked Danny Hansford. I thought he was a nice young man. He had befriended me and was very nice to me. And I had a convertible at the time, and he used to stop by my place and ring the security buzzer and said, I think somebody's trying to break into your car and things like that.
It was probably him.
There's more to Savannah than moonlight and magnolias, Jim Williams once said. Things can get very murky. And so it would one day prove for Jim and Danny Hansford. Although Jim Williams' parties were the most envied in town, they were far from the only ones. Savannah prides itself on being a party town.
It's just a party, party, party. When I moved here 32 years ago, the first question was, what do you like to drink? And I said, well, okay, I learned how to drink when I moved here.
Party going in Savannah has become synonymous with one of the favorite characters from the Midnight book, Joe Odom, the fly-by-night entrepreneur.
Joe was a tax attorney, but Joe didn't want to practice law. All Joe wanted to do was play the piano and sing that old honky-tonk music, as he called it. When Joe Odom got up in the morning, the only thing Joe ever thought about doing was having a good time.
Joe Odom was one of the most charming people I've ever met, and anyone who's met Joe will say the same thing. He's wildly charming, funny, and articulate. His house was always open to friends, so he never locked the front door. And he said to me, you know, I grew up thinking that if I had a check, a blank check, I had money.
One Savannah building, Lafayette House, stands as a virtual shrine to Joe's way of doing business. Joe sold apartments here, but somehow forgot to pay off his bank loan on the building.
Joe hosted 2 black tie parties here. He invited older women, older couples. The first night, 16 people put down money to buy apartments. Joe took their money, flew some of his friends to New Orleans. And again, these little ladies said, what a darling boy. It took 4.5 years for them to get their apartments. They did have to go through the court system.
It wasn't that he would take your money and steal it. He would invest money in something, he would invite you to invest with him, and you'd all lose money. So he ended up with losing everything. He lost his house, he lost his car, he lost his boat. His wife divorced him.
You couldn't help but love him, no matter what he did. I mean, it was really hard, and I would sit back and say, no, this isn't right, you know, but then again, it's not really wrong. You know, it was a confusing time in my life. And he used to tell me, now, I'm a very complicated individual, and that he was.
Joe Odom was proof that with enough charm and connections, you can get away with almost anything. Despite his business reputation, Joe's charm won him invitations to Jim Williams' exclusive parties. Although Jim was smart enough not to invest in any of Joe's schemes. Joe Odom changed addresses frequently, usually at the landlord's request. He moved into this house without the knowledge of either the owner or the agent, and began charging tourists to visit the house.
Folks, Joe lived there 6 months. The people in the neighborhood are furious. They cannot believe the real estate agent would leave this home with Joe Odom. The piano plays, morning, noon, and night. Parties are held there. Plus, we have the tour buses stopping.
He was bored with life. He would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and read 5 newspapers and already called 20 or 30 people he knew would be awake. And then he would start. What can we do today? He was always creating. He just had a problem following through. He would get bored with it. And once he created something and it was doing well, it was like, well, that's wonderful. Now let's go to do something else. Like a bad child.
Nancy Hillis, known as Mandy in the book, still gives tours in a house she once shared with Joe. But now, The tours have the city's blessing.
This was where the gentlemen came to smoke cigars and have brandy after dinner.
Nancy was an aspiring opera singer, but found there was more money singing in nightclubs.
There's a big difference between Dixieland jazz and blues and opera. You know what I mean? Opera is the Messiah, and, you know, Dixieland is see your mama every night. Big difference.
And singing was not her only talent.
She told me how she drove every day from south of Savannah to Savannah, an hour and a half every day. She drove with her knees because she was doing her makeup and her hair with her hands. She was very busy. And she was also watching her soaps on the portable TV on the seat next to her, driving with her knees on the highway, doing her hair and her makeup. How can you hate someone like that?
It was Nancy's singing career that led her to cross paths with, guess who?
And I was in one ballroom, and the infamous Joe Odom was in another. Mutual friends said, "Have you met that rich lawyer from Savannah? The one that..."
2 months later, Joe suggested that they open a nightclub together.
And I said, "Joe, I have no money." He said, "That's okay. We're going to use OPM." And I thought, gosh, I just took my licensing. That's a mortgage that I'm not familiar with. Stands for other people's money. And Joe was very good at that. And we used OPM, and we opened Sweet Georgia Brown's in City Market.
All seemed to be going well on the surface, but Joe was writing bad checks.
Money. Eventually, Sweet Georgia Brown's was closed. The club, Sweet Georgia Brown's, was open 3.5 years before Joe threw it into bankruptcy.
Joe was charged with a felony and ordered to pay back the owed money. But sadly, before he could, he died in 1990. Nancy says he would have adored all the current publicity.
He'd be in the middle of it. He'd have your job. He'd have your job, and he'd be controlling the network. He'd always said when this boy writes his book, Nancy, we're going to be in Hollywood.
Nancy was not the only club performer to lose money by falling for Joe's charms. When we come back, the lady of 6,000 songs who sang the blues after her venture with Joe. If Joe Odom was the most charmingly undependable character in the book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, then most readers would agree that Miss Emma Kelly is the most lovable.
What did I do? I thought about you.
Emma Kelly is one of the most beloved figures in South Georgia. And before my book came out, she was very well known. She plays the piano in schools, in churches, for fashion shows, for whatever. Local events. She'll show up. She'll play the piano.
Emma knows, to her cost, what it's like to be in business with Joe Odom. But more on that later. Emma is famous as the Lady of 6,000 Songs, a name given to her by Savannah's own Johnny Mercer, who wrote Moon River and dozens of other standards. Mercer calculated that Emma knew the words and music to at least that many songs.
I've never been across anyone that has so many songs together. I learned from her constantly in terms of new songs, old songs. Emma is a Library of Congress, I guess. Is it right to say Library of Congress? She knows 6,000 songs plus.
Johnny Mercer heard about a woman who seemed to know all his songs, and over the phone, he had Emma sing the first 8 bars of one of his lesser-known songs, If You Were Mine.
And his first words in, as soon as I stopped right there. He says, "Well, who are you?" And I said, "Well, my name is Emma Kelly." And I learned later that it was one of his favorites that not many people knew, and it was a test. Had I not known that song, there'd have been no Johnny Mercer for me.
That began a lifelong friendship in which Mercer cataloged Emma's amazing store of song knowledge. She's been memorizing songs for 75 years, since she was 4, when first encouraged by her father.
He said, when someone is nice enough to ask you to play, you play. Not long, but you played. And I'll never forget it. Boy, if someone asked you to play, I'd jump and run to this piano. So that...
People are reading about Emma all over the country. They coming in here to hear her, to see her, and to hear what this thing is all about. And they are surprised and they are shocked that this lady, is, at her age, sitting down, playing the piano extraordinarily.
Very often they'll say, play some Johnny Mercer. Well, right off, they want Moon River. Well, I love Moon River too, but you sort of get the way you want to play something else. So very often I'll start off with this one because it moves and it's popular. People remember it. My mama done told me when I was in pigtails. My mama done told me a man's gonna sweet talk. Give it the big eye. But when that sweet talk is done, a man is a true thing, a worrisome thing who'll leave you to sing the blues in the night.
Emma's work schedule would be enough to leave a young rock and roller exhausted. Because she hates to say no to an invitation, she drives 45,000 miles a year between concerts.
And she appears 4 nights a week in a piano bar in Savannah, and she'll drive home 50 miles to Statesboro. I hope she still doesn't go 90 miles an hour as she used to. She killed 10 deer on the highway, not intentionally. Broke her heart every time. But she's a marvelous woman.
Emma's cruising speed is about the same as her age.
I drive 70, between 70 and 75. I asked him, the state patrol, I said, now how fast can I drive on a safe area? And you won't bother me, you won't worry me to death. And he said 9 miles over the speed limit. Well, that gives me a lot of chance to get where I want to go in a hurry. But if I want to get somewhere, I'll pass them in a minute.
Emma's children, she says she has 10 so far, have all but given up on persuading her to cut back on her mileage or her schedule.
I'm a free spirit, but they worry about my being sleepy at night, and that does, but I just pull over at night and take a little nap. And if a patrolman or a policeman comes by, they'll pull over and pull that horn just lightly, and I'll look up and he'll say, you all right? And I said, yes, I'm just getting a little sleep. He said, well, take it easy.
Emma fears that one day she won't be able to drive from club to club. But as for retirement, no, says Emma. Music is my life.
I've been widowed, and I know that's brought me through that because I had something to do, people to see, laughs to be joined in. It just kept me going in the normal way. That Swanee River, play the right time, come on and hear. Alexander.
Emma once had her own club called Emma's, but her business sense was out of tune. The manager was Joe Odom.
I loved him because I'd known his family and knew him throughout. But he was a playboy. He got into trying to open up clubs because he would be there, and then he could always go in that till. And he went in his till and your till and my till. I'm still paying. But you'd love him right on.
But just like everybody else that got involved with Joe Odom, Miss Emma lost a lot of money here. Eventually, this club was closed. Emma's was open 6.5 years before Joe threw it into bankruptcy. Now, Emma Kelly has said that if she could not play herself in the movie, she would like to see Elizabeth Taylor play this part. Visions of grandeur.
Although she lost money with Joe Odom, Emma had better luck in her dealings with Jim Williams. Emma used to play at his parties and says he was very generous with his compensation.
He'd say at the end of the party, he'd say, "All right, Emma, let's go to the office and see how much you owe me." That was just the way he would always approach me. So we'd go in and he'd say, "How much is this to be?" And I said, "Well, how about?" And I'd give him a figure that was fine for me. "Emma, don't be ridiculous." And he would just write it up the scale. So he was nice to me, so you won't ever hear me fussing about him. Let me take you by
The inevitable question for Emma Kelly, one she's heard many times, is which is your favorite song out of the 6,000? Depends when you ask her.
You're going to believe what your heart tells you. And I always say, now this is one that the older ones of us that have had more birthdays will appreciate. Now you young ones will sometime, but you don't appreciate it yet. It's a long, long time from May to December, but the days grow short when you reach September, when the autumn weather turns the leaves to flame. One hasn't got time for the waiting game. Oh, the days dwindle down to a precious few. September, November, these few precious days I'll spend with you. That's one of them, but there are a lot of them.
It's nearly 4 o'clock. Almost time to begin what the book Midnight calls one of the most exclusive rituals in Savannah society.
Come on, let's check on everything.
Inside one of the city's great mansions, this month's hostess and her maid are making sure that everything is just so.
I think it's okay.
Outside, the cream of Savannah's female society is waiting for the precise second to enter.
Everybody check the time.
I'm so glad to see you.
Thus begins another meeting of the Married Woman's Card Club, or Married Woman's for short. If you like fads or changing with the times, this is not the club for you. It began in 1893 when Mrs. John Hawkins had some lady friends over.
Well, I think these ladies like to get together in the afternoons, and you know, everybody had servants then, and they started playing whist, as I understand, and then it turned into bridge later on. They made bylaws. Miss Hawkins had started, was a great parliamentarian, and she had bylaws. So.
Those bylaws have stood up pretty well over the past century plus. No more than 16 members are permitted at any one time. And invitations to guests are never verbal, unless in an emergency.
Do you know about the invitations, the beautiful engraved invitations? Well, they're lovely. They're on parchment paper. They're engraved, and you fill out your name and your date, and it has a seal, the seal of the Married Women's Card Club, and you answer it formally, and it's tradition, and that's what's so nice about it.
But one thing is you have to admit to being 30 years old.
Well, I think Savannah's rather a traditional city, and has been, and has always tried to maintain certain standards.
Anybody want to keep score? You want me to do it?
Being elected a member is quite an honor in this society-conscious town. Only married women are eligible, and membership of the club is said to have kept more than one marriage together.
You do leave the club if you get a divorce. That has happened.
Has happened.
Yes.
It's an unwritten rule that ladies remain members for no longer than 10 years. But members emeritus, like these ladies, continue to meet for years later, observing the rules to the letter.
The rules are very strict, and I did make an error on one occasion after I'd been in a couple of years. I thought it would be so nice to have a country party. So I've had my party at my father's hunting lodge at 12 o'clock, which was not the proper time, but we did everything else according to Hoyle. Everybody had a wonderful time, and at the next meeting they decided that that was not the way it should be. It should be at 4 o'clock, and only if you lived in the country could you have it in the country.
The unexpected is not appreciated.
A very dressed up lady, an elderly lady, marched in with me, and the hostess looked stunned because she wasn't invited. And yeah, you remember this? Mrs. Travis, and she hadn't been invited. And then she Miss Travis walked around a little while and said, "Oh, I think I'm at the wrong house." And she was invited to something that was up the street. But it had given the hostess, a little start, because there was no place card. There was no place card or anything.
The order of business is exact and must be followed. The card games begin upon entry at 4 o'clock. Then at 4:15, water is served. At 4:30, the water is removed. At precise intervals thereafter, ashtrays are emptied and napkins passed.
I think the maids some of the maids that we employed knew more about it than we did. They went to so many of them that they came and put everything on time at the right time, and put the water out, started the drinks, got it all going, whether we remembered it or not.
Everyone is delighted by the arrival of 5 o'clock. That brings the serving of the first round of cocktails. Further rounds of cocktails are scheduled for 5:15 and 5:30. Although in truth, this is one area where precision is judiciously relaxed.
We don't know how many we have. That's a secret.
And you have your driver. True. Martinis, Manhattans, old fashions. And the hostess came around many times during the next 15 minutes and just touched everybody's drink. So you never knew whether you'd had a whole drink, a half a drink. The glass was always full. And not until you stood up to go home were you aware of what you had done to yourself that afternoon.
The noise level got very, very, very high. You could tell the difference at about 10 minutes after the drink started out. Then the noise level got where you couldn't hear what anybody was saying at your own table.
All this can be taxing on the hostess, who has to balance graciousness with military precision.
You try to get it all straight, like the brass polished and the silver polished and windows washed and curtains washed, because you have plenty of time to plan for it. It's things you do anyway, but you just do them all at the same time.
My most vivid memory was how much my husband disliked it because the dining room table had to be put in the garage, and everything had to be changed, and it annoyed him terribly.
As in much of Savannah, opinion here is divided about the merits of the book, in which the club is featured.
Oh, I loved it.
You did?
I did. Oh, yeah. I couldn't put it down. Well, I read it quickly, but knowing so many people and growing up here, I felt like it was quite slanted to not the real society, I think it didn't shine as positive of a light on Savannah being very conservative. It seems to me we are a much more conservative society than it does show. And knowing friends that read the book, they want to come down and visit and see these places that we, of course, have never been don't want to go.
I've told a lot of other people that I didn't read it, so I might just as well say that now because I have not read it.
You may borrow my copy.
No, thank you.
At 5:40 comes the dinner plate, And the rule does say plate, singular, to prevent any spiral in competition of extravagance.
Our house on 41st Street.
We're so glad you could all come.
By 6 o'clock, precisely of course, it's all over. It's been a very full 2 hours, but the rules say that's enough. With the assistance of an imprecise quantity of cocktails, it's time for Savannah society ladies to return home. Not, they assure us, to cook dinner. A century-old tradition has been preserved for another month. Even before Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, Savannah was renowned for its beauty. The Spanish moss, the great oak trees, and the architecture going back more than 200 years.
When I'm walking around in this area, it's like being inside of a great big magnolia. And it has its own aesthetic, its own rhythm, its own fragrance even. It's very special. It's different.
But not long ago, the splendor of the historic district was very nearly obliterated. In the middle part of this century, many Savannians deserted this area for the space of the suburbs. Historic houses were demolished for their bricks or to make way for parking garages. 900 historic buildings were lost, and then a group of 7 society ladies began to fight back. In the 1950s, they formed the historic Savannah Foundation to preserve old buildings. Their first battle was to save Davenport House, which was to be knocked down for parking. Today's foundation members, most of them related to the original 7, remember the fight.
Well, I would need to read from words my mother-in-law said verbatim about those people. Mrs. Adler, Jane Wright, and I walked into the Davenport house. It was slums, a tenement house. Almost in one breath, Eleanor Adler, Jane Wright, Anna Hunter, and I said, no, this house must not be torn down, as was the city market.
Not only was Davenport House saved, but some 1,100 fine old buildings have been renovated since then, and the historic district has again become the city's showpiece. While much of the restoration has been done by organized groups, wealthy individuals have also been prominent, and no one more so than Jim Williams.
Jim left his legacy everywhere in the city. You may not know that he actually saved more than 70 houses in this city alone. Yes, it was a labor of love. He wanted to do it. So he did them because he wanted to, and he enjoyed it. He had fun doing what he did.
Of all his restorations, none gave Jim Williams greater satisfaction than his own home, Mercer House. It was the crowning achievement of a man who devoted his professional and private life to fine things. However, for Jim's 21-year-old associate, Danny Hansford, Mercer House must have seemed like a whole other planet. Danny had left a broken home in his early teens for a life on the street.
You can't put someone in that element into that sort of situation. I mean, you're surrounded by Fabergé boxes and Italian Capodimonte and porcelain and things like that that, of course, he would not know of. He'd be more interested in whose earrings there might be on the side of a table or whose socks are on the floor from the night before or something. But
I don't think the house just strictly represented money to him. He didn't know the names of the antiques and how rare things were, or the rare works of art, but he knew that it was money. And I think that was very appealing to him.
Inside Mercer House, Danny could be a bull in a china shop, given to fits of rage, reportedly once firing a gun into the floor and twice overdosing on drugs.
A friend of mine and I had gone down to see Jim, and Danny Hansford was sitting in the parlor when we got there. He was sort of stretched out in this chair, and we walked in, and Jim said to him, "Get up when ladies come in the house, in the room," and he leaped out of the chair and just went into a rage. I saw the most instant insanity in this boy's face. I mean, it was an insane, violent look, and he kicked the chair and walked out of the room in a huff. And I turned to Jim and I said, "You know, you're on a collision course with this boy." And then I made the most incredible statement. I said, he's either going to kill you or you're going to have to kill him.
In the days to come, Jim Williams and all of Savannah would see how prophetic those words were. In exploring Savannah to write his book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, author John Berendt met all sorts of interesting characters, and not all of them are part of high society. If there was a poll of readers of the book, the most memorable character would almost certainly be the Lady Chablis.
When I'm on stage, it gives me so much energy. And when I come out and I can put smiles on people's face, it's an incredible feeling. But I do warn everybody before I do a show, I go, you know, if you're into Disney movies and Lion King and stuff like that, you might want to leave now, because I am not a Disney production.
Nobody would call the Lady Chablis your typical homegrown Savannian. In fact, many Savannians had never heard of her until she was featured in the book. Her name was taken from a wine bottle when Chablis was already 16 years old.
And she said, my mother wanted to have a little girl, and she was going to name the girl La Quinta Chablis. But then she had a miscarriage. And Chablis said, I said to my mother, I like the name Chablis. And so her mother said, just call yourself Chablis from now on. So she said, that's what I've done. I call myself Chablis. So I said, what was your name before it was Chablis? She said to me, Frank. That's when I knew.
I think that the woman is God's best, most wonderful creation, which is why I call myself female impersonator. The woman taught me everything that I know. And my being in touch with my masculine and my feminine side, I do realize that the female is where the power is. So of course I want to be on that side. They can give birth, they show their emotions, and they know how to shop. You know, so, I mean, that's where I want to be. I'm not a football player. I am not a beer guzzler. I'm not a sperm donor. I am not that. I am me.
Chablis was born Benjamin Edward Knox in 1957, but Benjamin soon realized he was not cut out to be a boy.
I would look at myself in the mirror when I lived for my family, and I was very uncomfortable with what I saw, especially at Easter time, because, you know, at Easter, black folks love to put you in a suit and dress you up and send you to church. And I just did not like the way that I looked in a male suit. I just didn't like that. I was very uncomfortable. And once I tried on female attire and I looked at myself in the mirror, a burden was taken off my back. It was a relief. I exhaled.
She is a brilliantly talented woman. She's just something called a woman, and I've never thought of her as anything but a woman. She's a comedian. She's original, and that's what makes her so special.
Listen, baby, I work by myself. I don't need no extra help, okay? So hush, okay? You are not on the payroll. I do not need you telling me what to do, okay? And stop pointing at that boy, honey. What's your last name? Green? As in money green? Oh, hell yeah, you can be my husband, honey. Yes, you can. A&E, Arts and Entertainment. We are definitely giving you Arts and Entertainment, baby. Y'all need to put some more letters on it now, honey. And call it A and E and C, honey. Arts, Entertainment, and Chablis, baby. Let's take it over. You know, I have lived this way for so long that I just look at myself as a female. I mean, this is how I live. When I wake up in the morning, if I have to just run to the grocery store to get milk, and I have on no makeup and just earrings, I'm still greeted as ma'am, yes ma'am, no ma'am, thank you ma'am.
Since the book Midnight was released, Chablis has become a media darling, appearing twice on Oprah and writing a book of her own called Hiding My Candy.
I'm going to show you my favorite picture in my book, and it's so appropriate for the South. and it is called The Negro Scarlett O'Hara. And under each picture, in every chapter, there's a different picture. And under this picture, the caption is, the New South. So what do you think about that?
Chablis also has her own internet site, featuring recipes, fashion tips, even her own vocabulary.
I have my own vocabulary because I refuse to be labeled. You label streets and you label buildings. You don't label me. For example, I use terms like incognito. And what I mean by that is that's me without my makeup on, with tennis shoes on, sort of like I am right now. That's what I call incognito. We have the SLUWW, the Savannah League of Uptown White Women. That's all of us women who go to and get our hair done, our nails done, and shopping at somebody else's expense.
Since her sudden fame, Chablis says she's got a lot of support from a new wave of fans.
People tell me sometimes that I'm an inspiration to them, which is quite flattering. And I think that people say these things because I've always, since the time that I can remember, even as a child, I've always lived my life for me and no one else. Because I've always felt that this life was given to me, not everybody else, so it's mine to do what I want to with it.
When it comes to the movie of Midnight, Chablis will play herself. As Clint Eastwood says, she's got to act going.
I knew all along they didn't have a choice, because who could play the doll better than the doll? And so they didn't have a choice. I knew that Donna Ross wanted to play me, which was very flattering, but she couldn't have pulled it off.
You look fabulous, girl. I love it, the little white girl run. Let me do the black girl run.
But despite the celebrity and her pride in being who she is, life as a woman in a man's body is not easy.
Being black, being gay, being in the field that I'm in, dressing as I do when people realize who and what I am. Sometimes it has been difficult, but those are the obstacles that I enjoy getting in my way, because those are the obstacles I'm going to knock out of the way. The hardest part has always been, to me, the gay community itself, because they will label you that drag queen really bad. And, you know, my being black, baby, I've gone through the civil rights thing, and I am not about to go through this drag queen versus the gay man thing with my own people. I find that some gays can be very critical and very hurtful. I don't know, it's because I've always performed for them and now things that they say affect me more. But I think back, gay people have always put entertainers like myself at the bottom of the gay totem pole.
Chablis is quick to point out, though, there's at least one definite advantage in having a foot in both gender camps.
I just feel like that I'm going to be nominated, or they better nominate me for Best Supporting Actress and Best Supporting Actor. You know, I need both of those awards. I am both people. This is the one time I'll come straight and go, yeah, I'll be that Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor. I'll take that award. So either way, I can't lose.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed the show, my name is Lady Chablis. If you didn't enjoy the show, my name is John Barron. Good night and thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, A&E. See you in the movies.
While it's characters like Chablis that give the book Midnight its flavor, it's the events in Mercer House that give the book its drama. When we come back, the killing that still haunts Savannah. On May 2nd, 1981, Mercer House once again became the talk of Savannah, but not because of any Christmas party. Sometime after midnight, Jim Williams shot and killed Danny Hansford in circumstances that are still hotly debated today. Williams said it was self-defense. Prosecutors claimed it was murder. When police arrived, they found Danny's body lying face down in Jim Williams' study, his hand cupped over a German Luger. Another Luger was sitting on Williams' desk.
Jim Williams' explanation was that he and Danny had been out at a movie and had come back and had something to drink, and it was late, it was 2 o'clock or later. And that Danny flew into a tirade, which he had done before. He kicked in the television set, smashed some things.
Williams said he went to call the police because Danny had done this sort of thing before, but that Danny had grabbed him by the throat and threw him against a doorway. Williams said he struggled free and went to his study.
The way Jim tells it, Danny left the room, smashed a grandfather clock and other items, came in holding a gun in his hand, and said, "I'm leaving this house tomorrow, but you're leaving tonight." Fired twice at Jim Williams across the desk, but missed. Jim got his gun from the drawer, took it out, and fired 3 times at Danny, killed him.
I've never shown these pictures publicly before, although they are...
The county coroner, Dr. James Metz, was called to the scene in the middle of the night. Here, he makes public for the first time some of the police photos taken that night.
Once we entered the foyer, as you can see, there was some disorder. There's a grandfather clock that's lying face down and fractured. There's a couch on its side, various debris about it. Even though we're investigating a death scene, we couldn't help being impressed by the taste and wealth exhibited in that home. This is a close-up of Mr. Williams' weapon, along with his handwritten note with the police phone number, and obviously where he looked it up and was in the process of notifying the authorities.
When the police came, they took Jim Williams downtown and charged him with murder. He was released on $25,000 bail.
Savannah was shocked and mesmerized by this. He was a hugely successful man who had done marvelous things in Savannah and highly thought of. And for him suddenly to kill a kid at 20 years old was a shock.
Joe Odom told the author that with the killing, to go along with all of Savannah's character portraits, the story had the makings of one heck of a Hollywood movie. Many Savannians, including Jim Williams, believed the murder charge would be dropped, that the authorities would accept the word of a gentleman that he had acted in self-defense.
But you have to remember the social strata here, where Jim Williams had done important things for the community, and his lover was painted as being a ne'er-do-well, ill-tempered young man who would race around in fast cars and make trouble. He was a nobody, and Jim Williams was a big somebody.
So it was a shock when Williams was ordered to stand trial on a charge of first-degree murder.
The district attorney, Spencer Lawton, was brand new at the job. He'd only had one trial, a murder trial before, and he'd lost that. So people were very skeptical of his abilities, and they were watching very closely. So he was really intent upon winning the case against Jim Williams. There were high stakes for him.
The trial was set for January 1982, but Williams was unruffled. Telling the press he'd done nothing wrong, he went on an antique buying trip to Europe, then held his Christmas party as usual. Most of those invited came. But some resented him, because Danny Hansford, a street hustler, was known as a walking streak of sex. And more than a few Savannians had been waiting for their own private turn with him.
This person said that many people in Savannah were looking forward to their turn with Danny Hansford, and when Jim shot him, they realized they weren't going to get their turn. And so the shooting of Danny Hansford would cause a lot of resentment against Jim for that reason, if not for the obvious reason that he killed somebody. Danny Hansford was known as a good time, but a good time not yet had by all.
More important for Jim Williams would be the jury's attitude towards homosexuality.
It was well known going into the trial that he was a homosexual antique dealer. And that in the early 80s in a town as small as Savannah was not a very popular thing to be. Savannah's a very religious community. Despite having a party atmosphere, most everybody went to church.
He shot him in cold blood.
Before a packed courthouse on opening day, the DA, Spencer Lawton, said Williams had not acted in self-defense because Danny Hansford had not even been holding a gun. He said Williams had rearranged the scene to make it look like self-defense.
The district attorney says Danny did not have a gun in his hand. He did not go and get a gun. That Jim had taken his gun out and shot him once, walked around the desk, and as Danny lay on the floor, shot him twice more, once to the back of the head, and once to the back. And that then Jim had put his gun back down on the desk and gone and gotten a second gun and walked back into the room, stood where Danny had stood, and fired twice at the position that Jim had occupied before, across the desk. And then he'd taken that second gun and put it under the hand of the dead Danny Hansford.
Williams' lawyers argued, however, that after Danny fired and missed, Williams' first shot hit Danny in the chest and spun him around. As he was falling, the second bullet hit him in the back of the head and the third in the back. But the defense found it much harder to show that Danny really had fired at Williams first.
I don't think Danny had a weapon. I think Mr. Williams went upstairs and got the weapon after Danny was dead. That's just my opinion.
Coroner James Metz says evidence suggests that Jim Williams himself fired the shots from Danny's side of the desk.
Mr. Williams related that Danny had a gun and that he fired the gun, and the gun struck an object on the desk, scattering some papers about, fragments. It's interesting that some of these fragments were found in the chair cushion that Mr. Williams was sitting on. Had Mr. Williams been sitting in the chair at the time the shot was fired, those fragments would not have been there.
Dr. Metz says the blood stain on Danny's wrist suggests the gun was probably placed in his hand after he was dead.
Mr. Williams had a weapon. He wanted a place to put it that would be artistically satisfactory. He reached under Danny, pulled his wrist out, and placed it up in the open where it could be seen, and then placed the gun on it. But in so doing, the wrist rotated under Mr. Williams' fingers, producing a circumferential smear which could not have been produced in any other fashion.
This police photo was also bad news for the defense. It shows a chair leg resting on Danny's jeans after he'd fallen dead. How could that happen, the prosecution asked, unless Williams rearranged the scene? Even more compelling was the evidence that there was no residue of gunpowder on Danny Hansford's hands. That, said the prosecution, showed he could not have fired a gun.
It seemed fairly cut and dried until Jim Williams took the stand and made a, I think, very compelling testimony that it was self-defense.
The man had a gun and shot it at me. I just took the Luger and shot 1, 2, 3.
When Jim Williams took the stand and talked about being absolutely terrified, he was very credible. You could see the fear come back in his face again. If he wasn't telling the truth, he was putting on a very good performance.
There was a lot of evidence for the jury to consider, but they took just 3 hours. The verdict, guilty of murder. The sentence for Savannah's best-known socialite was life in jail. It was a downfall of mythic proportions. Jim Williams, the epitome of cultured society, was now a convicted murderer, and Savannah could hardly believe it.
They were very upset. They were in a state of shock, I guess. They expected that he would get off, so that he would be found not guilty, that he was not guilty.
But Williams wasn't beaten yet. In his appeal, the Georgia Supreme Court found that prosecutors had deliberately withheld evidence about Danny Hansford's temper. Evidence that Danny Hansford may have once, in a rage, fired a bullet into the floor of Mercer House. The guilty verdict was thrown out. Jim Williams would get a new trial. This time around, Williams said he would have extra help. What he didn't say was that this help would come from forces far beyond the county courtroom. He was visiting a voodoo priestess named Minerva, a secretive figure in purple-tinted glasses.
The low country of South Carolina and Georgia is filled with voodoo. Slaves brought it from Africa to the West Indies and from there to the United States. And there are remnants of it in Beaufort County, South Carolina, and in and around Savannah. And they say on Halloween you take your black cat and hide and put him in the, lock him in the closet so he doesn't get sacrificed.
Jim Williams had long believed in the supernatural. He said this house that he was restoring in Savannah was haunted.
He called me one day and laughed and says, "You're not going to believe this." And I said, "What?" He said, "You know, this house is haunted." I said, "Oh, come on now." He said, "No, Liv, it really is haunted." He said, "Some strange things are happening down here." And so later on, he asked Bishop Albert Stewart, the Episcopal Bishop of Georgia, if he would exorcise the house. And he did.
Williams told the voodoo priestess Minerva he wanted a curse put on the district attorney Spencer Lawton. She told him to write out Lawton's name 7 times in dove's blood, then hide the paper for the duration of the trial.
I love that part because what it really shows that even Southern whites, when the chips get down, they come to blacks and begin to seek those superstitions.
Angel Hakeem, a Savannah spiritualist, says 75% of her clients are white, and that Savannah is just full of spirits.
There are spirits everywhere. I've seen them at functions. I've seen them in restaurants. It all goes with the history. Savannah's a town where at one time there was a lot of war here, and there were Indians here, and there's just a lot of bloodshed, period. This is Dove's Blood Ink.
Angel, who says she works only for the good, not in curses, uses many of the same talismans and rituals as Minerva, such as herbs, roots, candles, and oils. But she says the rituals are not really important. It's the faith behind them.
It's not so much the specific materials that you use, it's the intent that's in your mind when you perform the ritual to do whatever it is you're trying to do towards a person.
Many rituals involve the cemetery. Minerva used graveyard dirt to put a curse on the judge and the DA.
They may throw it in a pathway where they know that the person is going to be walking, and if this person becomes somewhat paranoid and begins to generate that negativity that goes along with the graveyard dirt, and they in turn give power to the negative force that's been placed there to do evil, and then in turn the evil begins to happen.
In the book, Minerva goes to the graveyard, which she calls the garden, to ask evil spirits to work against the DA and to invoke good so that Danny Hansford's spirit will not work against Jim Williams.
15 minutes before midnight is when good spirits walk the earth, and if you know what you're doing, you can probably charge them to do some good for you. 15 minutes after midnight, which is 12 to 12:15, evil spirits have their reign also, because in order for this earth to be balanced, good and evil must have its place.
It's this belief that gave John Berendt his title for the book.
When I wrote the title, I looked at it and I thought, well, that is Savannah. It's a garden city, beautiful squares with flowering shrubs and Spanish moss hanging from oak tree. That Savannah was a garden city of good and evil, and Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil sounded just right to me, so I called the book that.
As well as Minerva, Jim Williams had some more conventional help for his second trial, a new lawyer, Sonny Seiler.
He's brilliant, and he can assemble an argument that can persuade anybody. Also, in court, he's very compelling. The jurors liked him. They trusted him. This is important for a defense lawyer to manage.
Seiler has such a natural courtroom presence that he has a role in Clint Eastwood's movie of Midnight as the judge. Seiler also enjoys local fame as the owner of Uga, a pet bulldog who doubles as the University of Georgia mascot. This is Uga number 5, the latest in a proud line of Ugas stretching back to 1955, all owned by Sonny. He says Uga is the most famous animal in Georgia.
He was pretty important to Sports Illustrated because this year they named him the best college mascot in the nation and put his face on the cover, so he too is a star.
Ironically, Armstrong House, where Sonny Seiler practices, was once owned and restored by Jim Williams. And inside, Seiler had to find a way around the prosecution's most powerful evidence. Seiler said the lack of gunpowder on Danny's hands did help the prosecution's claim that Danny had not fired a weapon. Even so, Seiler decided to stay with a case of self-defense.
He'd gone on a tirade, and it was just so much of that Jim was going to take, but the evidence showed that Hansford grabbed him and threw him up against the wall and threatened to shoot him, came in the room with the pistol. I mean, what you going to do?
Seiler says Williams never doubted that he would be cleared of the murder charge.
Whenever I went to Mercer House, I did good to hold his attention for 30 or 40 minutes before he suggested, let's have a vodka and tonic. He knew that he was innocent and had faith in the system and left it up to us to prove it.
But Seiler had very little new evidence to bring to the second trial. And once again, the jury did not share Jim Williams' belief in his innocence. Again, the verdict was guilty, and the sentence, life in prison.
Now, as we turn to our right sits Chatham County Jail. This is where Jim Williams, our main character in the book, was incarcerated after he shot and killed Danny Hansford.
While waiting for another appeal, Williams' new home was a cell shared with 7 other homosexual inmates.
He was always neat, well-groomed. His uniform was always pressed and neat. He had that dark hair with graying temples, looked very distinguished, smoked cigars. He played chess. He'd teach the other inmates how to play chess. But then you'd have the other inmates in here be dressed up in outfits they would make out of their sheets. Mini skirts, halter tops, screaming, carrying on, trying to provoke officers and their other inmates. It was quite a contrast.
Despite the noise, Williams was able to continue doing business on what might be called the cell phone, making collect calls to his home that were then rerouted to the antique houses of the world.
Jim had the money that he would buy a commissary for the other inmates, and when he was on the phone, would usually have them quiet by promising to buy commissary and stuff for them where he would get his work done.
Williams wrote to clients using the prison address, but not the prison name, of course.
He would tell us like he just got off the phone making a deal over in Sweden or Norway or wherever to get some antiques shipped in. He'd bid in. He would get mail in, show us auction sheets where he'd send off on bids on items.
He was really a remarkable person. He had concentration and focus that few people have. Somehow he was able to make the most of each minute, regardless of the situation. For instance, he wrote journals, he wrote essays, he wrote poems, he wrote children's stories.
Minerva had promised Williams that he would be turned loose, and after 2 years of jail time, she was proven right. The Georgia Supreme Court ruled that the prosecution had presented evidence incorrectly and again threw out Jim Williams' conviction. He would get a third trial. But before the third trial began, Williams told John Berendt he was going to change his whole story.
He was going to say that when Danny came in with a gun and aimed it at him, the gun was on safety and he couldn't fire it. So that would explain the lack of gunshot residue on Danny's hands. And then Jim said, I shot him, and then I thought, what have I done? And I went and took his gun and fired at myself in possession. This would explain the 2 shots fired toward Jim, and it would explain also the lack of gunfire residue. And I thought it was a lot, just too pat, too perfect. It fit the evidence that had emerged. And I said to him, if you do that, if you tell that story, it'll be just like admitting you were lying. And any jury who hears that story will think that you were lying completely and that Danny didn't even have a gun, jammed or jammed in his hand.
But Williams didn't need to change his story. Sonny Seiler came up with a tremendous new piece of evidence, one that had the power to change Jim Williams' fate. By the time Jim Williams' third trial began in 1987, much of Savannah had lost interest. Many believed he'd be found guilty yet again. But as Williams arrived at court, he and his lawyers knew of powerful new evidence that could change his fate. In the first 2 trials, police swore that they had put paper bags on Danny Hansford's hands at the scene of the killing to preserve evidence of whether he had any gunpowder on his hands. Tests showed that there was no gunpowder on the victim's hands, proving the prosecution said that the victim never fired a gun and that Williams had not acted in self-defense. But Williams' lawyer, Sonny Seiler, discovered Hansford's hospital admission sheet, and it was a bombshell.
Lo and behold, as it turned out, it had an entry on there from the nurse who received the body that she, in fact, had bagged the hands at the hospital, and they had not been bagged at Mercer House. It had been testified in all of the trials.
So wrapping him in a blanket and putting him on the gurney and taking him into the hearse and over to the hospital, got his hands bumped around, and perhaps we could have wiped off all the residue.
This new evidence, presented in the third trial, caught the prosecution completely by surprise.
The DA was blown away. He was speechless. I think I saw the color drain out of his face. I interviewed him live a few minutes later, and I asked, did you know about this witness? Did you know about this report? And he said, no, I had no idea. Surprises like that almost never really happen in the courtroom, but it was the cannon shot that blew a hole in the whole state's case.
But still, the jury was not convinced. It voted 11-1 to convict. The lone holdout would not change her mind.
If you people can't reach a verdict, I have no choice but to declare a mistrial, and I hereby do declare a mistrial in this case.
And so the case would have to go to a 4th trial.
Jim Williams is one of the only person in the state of Georgia tried 4 times for an alleged crime. One of the few people in the history of the nation tried 4 times. Now imagine if we had to go through that O.J. trial 4 times.
For the 4th trial in 1989, things began going Jim Williams' way. First off, the trial was moved from Savannah, where there was no longer any chance of an impartial jury, to Augusta, Georgia.
Those people didn't care anything about this case. They didn't know about it. They didn't even write it up in the Augusta papers.
In this trial, Seiler took aim at the police, and not just the bagging of Danny's hands. Seiler said photos show police had not secured the scene properly, and that all the evidence was tainted.
Jim Williams's cat, Shelton, had been left in the house and is seen in one of the police photographs meandering through the evidence. We used that effectively in the 4th trial Mr. John Barrett, who was present in the audience, liked it so that he actually was going to name the book The Cat Did It.
All this was enough to convince the fourth jury. This time they took just 20 minutes to find Jim Williams not guilty.
How to evaluate evidence, even evidence that might have looked a little strange to them. I think they knew how to read between the lines.
Sonny Trial more or less invented the O.J. defense, and that is you don't defend the accused, you accuse the police. You put the police on trial.
Well, it tells you a little bit about American jurisprudence. That if you're rich enough, you can perhaps buy the verdict that you want.
Jim Williams was a truly free man for the first time in 8 years. But according to Minerva, his problems were not yet over. She visited Danny Hansford's grave and said she heard laughter. That he was still working against Jim Williams, looking to get even. Williams, meanwhile, had settled back into Mercer House, resuming the life that had been interrupted by gunfire nearly a decade ago. In January 1990, just 8 months after his acquittal, Williams came downstairs to feed his cat, and in his study, he suddenly collapsed and died at the age of 59. The official cause was pneumonia. In an eerie twist of irony, Williams fell in almost exactly the same spot he would have fallen 9 years earlier had Danny Hansford shot him. Minerva had her own theory. It was the boy that done it, she told the author.
She thinks that people can affect affairs from beyond the grave. So she was concerned that Danny not get retribution against Jim. And she tried to prevent that in her own way. And she feels that Jim's death might indeed be because of the efforts of the dead Danny Hansford.
In the years since, the controversy has not abated over just what did happen the night Danny Hansford died. Everyone in Savannah, it seems, has their own opinion.
In my opinion, Danny Hansford more or less pulled the trigger on himself by his own actions. As I reconstruct, Mr. Williams was likely sitting at his desk with his Luger, concealed by some papers over the gun. I don't think he wanted a confrontation with Danny, but I think he was frightened. I think when Danny finally, with his escalating violence and rage, precipitated Mr. Williams to pull the trigger in a fit of rage, anger in himself. And I think what triggered it was when Danny put a cigarette out on Mr. Williams' desk. The desk was an ornate and very expensive Oriental desk, which later sold for $120,000. When you in Mr. Williams' place, you're tired, you're frightened, you're angry, you're surrounded by these beautiful things, which are, in fact, your life. And you have this barbarian stand in front of you and grind a cigarette out into the top of the finished desk. I think at that point, Mr. Williams simply began to pull the trigger.
When I talk to people in Savannah now, it's my experience that a great majority feels that he was guilty. Not of premeditated murder, but more like manslaughter. And that there was a certain fear that people are willing to acknowledge that Jim might very well have been terrified that Danny was going to grab a gun as he had done a month earlier. But I think that the prosecution's evidence is fairly compelling.
I think he probably attacked Jim, and I think Jim always had a loaded gun. He always did. We do. And I just think he went into one of those rages, and I think Jim knew that he was going to kill him.
I don't know that anyone will ever know it, and the people now who are involved in it are all both dead, and I don't know that anyone will ever know. If I were a juror, I'd have a hard time making up my mind what I thought happened.
Jim spent 8 years and over $1 million clearing his name, and he was acquitted. He was cleared. And he would never have allowed anyone to forget that.
It was just a very unfortunate thing that happened, you know, with this incident. But as far as the incident happened, that's why we're all famous now.
So maybe he left some sort of legacy.
That legacy can be measured by the number of tourists flocking into Savannah in what's become almost a cult following for the book.
Oh, the book has increased tourism for me and my company at least by 75% since last January. Originally, I started with one bus 4 years ago, and because of the book, I have been able to purchase 2 more buses. I thank John every day for the book.
Is this your first time then in Savannah?
Yes. The Midnight Craze has spawned T-shirts, coffee mugs, fan clubs, even specialty gift stores.
The people that come in, they don't just come in, look around, and purchase something and leave. They usually stay about an hour, and we talk, and we have Emma Kelly singing on the tape in the middle room, and then in the back room, we also have the book on tape playing most of the time. So we're almost like a gift shop and little mini museum at the same time. Now, the fan club, we have about almost 400 members now, and we have a newsletter that we send out with the fan club with quite a few other little goodies about the book, and it's $20 for a membership of that, and then you get 2 to 3 newsletters after that a year.
I felt like the book gave a wonderful flavor of Savannah, that it sounded unique and different from any other place. So, got to see it.
I just thought the book was great, and it's very interesting now that I can take a picture home with me in my mind about what actually took place in Savannah to match up with the book.
Why is the book so popular? John Barron thinks he knows why.
First of all, it's true. It's all true. So for that reason, a book that's true is more compelling than a book that's not. I mean, if this were a novel, it would be lots of fun to read, but since it's true, it's that much more astonishing. The city is a magically, seductively beautiful American city that Americans had not known anything about. People read the book, and one of the first things that people tend to say is, boy, I want to go to Savannah. I want to see this incredible town.
And tourists that come to Savannah, you know, they spend several $100s a day. And you know, Savannahans have long realized that it is easier to pick a Yankee tourist than it is to pick a bale of cotton.
But not all Savannahans welcome the new interest in their city. Outsiders have begun buying up property, sending prices soaring out of the reach of many locals. And more tourists means more noise.
When work hour was over, this part of town became so quiet. It was like living in the country. There were no cars, nobody was around, everybody was gone. Mainly what I don't like is that all of these things that are so successful bring a whole new crowd of people and a whole new bunch of cars and trucks, and now we have horses and who's going to shovel them up and all of that kind of problem. And besides, at 5 in the afternoon, I can't write anymore. It's too noisy.
Other Savannahans are upset that the book has given an entirely wrong portrayal of the city.
Johnny Mercer is a wonderful son of Savannah, and one of his songs was Accentuate the Positive. And so we want to accentuate the positive and not the negative. And I think the negative is emphasized in that book.
I don't like any part of the book because it doesn't portray Savannah, the beautiful city that I moved to in 1956. And I just think it was ludicrous.
The people in Savannah are too polite to accuse me to my face of that. They'll do it behind my back, and I'm perfectly happy to have them do it. Anyway, the mayor of Savannah said to me not long ago that he said, I've decided you should buy a house in Savannah. And I said, Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, I've decided you should give me one. He hasn't given me one yet, though.
Those who make a living from tourism have found themselves becoming targets for local anger.
Hello, how you doing? Matter of fact, I've been called quite a few things, lost some friends over it. I was locking up one day right after we opened in our new location here on Calhoun Square. I was locking up, and a gentleman, a lawyer here, who was a friend of the family's, and his 13-year-old son were walking past. The afternoon, they were getting their walk-in, and he made a comment as, son, now look over there. Some people here have no morals and values.
Savannahans who don't like the effects of the book won't be too crazy about the likely effects of the film. Millions of new potential tourists will be exposed to the city's unique charm, and the ever-expanding tourist industry will be here to make them welcome.
There's an old saying, when you go to Atlanta, the first thing they're going to ask you is what you do for a living. When you go to Macon, Georgia, they want to know what church you attend. When you go to Augusta, they want to know your grandmother's maiden name. But when you come to Savannah, the first thing we're going to ask you is, what would you like to drink? Savannahans have always loved having a good time. We love showing off our city to company.
And here's a warning to another southern destination. To get ready for a tourist influx, John Berendt has been in Louisiana, researching stories.
Now from A&E Home Video, you can own Midnight in Savannah. Call 1-800-423-1212, and for $29.95 plus shipping and handling, receive this behind-the-scenes special presentation. Now witness incredible stories of bravery and heroism amid the corruption, alcoholism, and suicide of police. A special presentation next on A&E.